Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, we're going to cover another well-known person in the radionic industry, and that is Bruce Copen of Post-Copen Laboratories. He died in 1998 at the age of 75. So, he didn't even live the normal age, which is about 78 to 80. That's the general life expectancy pretty much around the world. Actually, it kind of evens out to about 80 right now, depending on where you live. The United States is a little down. The UK, where he is from, he's British, is about 80 and above. Now, we're talking about the average here. There's a lot of people who are living much longer. And one of the problems is here we go again with another radionic person that died pretty young. I mean, you'd think that all these people in the medical industry and using all their homeopathics, etc., would be able to easily reach their mid-80s, which so many people are. I mean, it isn't exactly a claim to fame to be 85, 86. With, as I said, life expectancy as a general rule is 80, yet he didn't make it and apparently died of a heart attack, which seems to be difficult to actually prevent. But that is a problem with all these alternative practitioners, people who talk about all these great things. We just don't know. I think, and I don't, it appears that upon his death, he didn't really leave anything to family members, etc. I don't know if he was married or not. He may have been gay. I don't know. I don't think there was any AIDS problems here that I'm aware of. But it's just another one of the almost every single case of these radionic practitioners in particular not living very long. The big question is why? Why is there such a terrible actual understanding of why these particular technologies don't seem to help the inventors and users? Now, to give a brief history of him, after coming back from World War II, he made a soil analyzer called the Model Y. This was released in 1947, and in the late 60s, the Mark II computer was released. Now, I don't know if there was a big gap between that. That's a long time before that, but he claims to have a doctorate in philosophy and literature. Was an avid writer from a young age. During his youth, he wrote a number of stage plays, books on poetry. Kind of odd that he would be into this. He has no scientific formal education, and there's been some doubts that he has a doctorate either, that he may have just bought this. We're not sure, but a doctorate in philosophy and literature doesn't really qualify you in this area. There's not even any health areas there. So again, that points towards, what is his basic understanding. Apparently, he was honored being initiated as a Knight of the Sovereign Order of St. John of Jerusalem, one of these Masonic type societies, and he has written a whole bunch of books and courses, etc., on healing, radiothesia, radionics, etc., yet he doesn't seem to be overly trained in that area, and started a radionic association in Britain, had a radionic school, etc. So he certainly, he was the founder of the British Radionic Association, which is different than the association now. They also founded the International College of Radionics, which I'm not sure if that's still in operation, but it could be. Now, a lot of his instruments seem to be all based in potentizing, meaning making homeopathic preparations. They're not traditional broadcast units, so I find this interesting as well. So, very much into homeopathy and everything else, which was very legal in Britain and something that gained easy acceptance from the general public. Um, he then would, it's very big into dowsing and having this as a big part of the process of what he was doing. He apparently was the first person to develop a color healing instrument, and that this instrument held color rates and transmitted and broadcast them radionically as part of this process. So it's very interesting. He developed some very interesting different machines. He was very big into dowsing, very big into homeopathy, and was something that was what he specialized in, and was very prolific in his writings and in the machines he particularly produced. And all of his machines, and I have several of them, are extremely well made. They have lots of different dials, which I think is overkill now. I'm not really sure getting all these dials of how important that is in your process, and certainly for the average person. So they're kind of intimidating when you see 30, 40 dials on something, and this has to be particularly tuned in. So if you look at all of his training and courses and everything else, and apparently after his death there was kind of a changeover, even though it appears that someone is still selling his old style instruments. He also was one of the first to develop what he calls EECS cards. And this is a held electronic encoded card system, which held information for that you would insert into the machine, and that this would then produce more instantaneous results than having to go in there and do all this elaborate dialing. He also had multi-wave oscillators that he built as well. All of these, of course, were built well and construction well. All of his equipment looks great, has beautiful cabinets, and was made well. And apparently some of this seems to be going on by, we're not sure who is owning anything. There are some companies that, particularly out of Mexico, using his name and has kind of copied his entire look of his machines, which is interesting. I'm not sure how they can do that, or it's difficult to shut people down, but that, especially I'm assuming that are in Mexico, but he's using the Copen name as so many other ones. And I'm going to get more into his machines in a minute. We're going to actually show you a lot of his machines online here on our channel here in the coming months. We'll open these up, we'll look in the back, we'll tell you exactly how these work. But, with all the dials and everything else, these machines are fairly complex to use, and makes it more difficult. They also are like all of these machines. They generally cannot treat more than one person, and you're making remedies, basically. This is very homeopathic based. And homeopathics is based on this energy field around things. Subtle energy physics is certainly what you would call homeopathics. And these are fairly controversial, right even at this day. Now, as usual, there is very little that anybody or these manufacturers, and here's a guy who's been in the business since the middle 1940s and really doesn't have any research of what his products can do, even though it is legal in the UK to do such. So there isn't any historical information. There's nothing there to show what his instrument's done, how many people they have helped. Is there any kind of even testimonials? We're not seeing anything. So this is all very typical in this area, because testimonials could be making claims that you're not legal to do. So what happened, of course, upon his death in 1998 is apparently the company management was transferred over to Harold Raver, a German person who took over the company. And they were pretty much into bioresonance. This is a new technology of quantum response technology by this German company that claims they know how to do this. Now, bioresonance and everything else is another subject I'll get into in another lecture. But basically, they just took over the company, took the name, and then produced their own products that had absolutely nothing to do with his original products. It's a whole new computerized type system, and we'll talk about this, which I'm not really a fan of. I'm not sure how you can computerize these kind of energies, since they're subtle energy physics energies. How are you picking these up? What are the energies? It gets to be a very complicated situation. When you're using tuning devices, or at least individual program cards, which are magnetically imprinted with something, you at least have something more there. When you're using bioresonance, you have quite a problem. And of course, you get into all these really bad technologies that have absolutely no proof, done by a bunch of well-funded, basically fraudulent types that Germany is notorious for putting out. They don't have any credibility whatsoever, except for the fact, I'm shaman, it's good. That's about it, because there isn't any science behind it. So, to think that they can do what they state with these machines seems to be a giant con to me. And what seems to be further there is that they just sell these things for very high prices, which I'm assuming they make for pennies, which is very typical. And this is somebody's pet baby in Germany, which has a very fraudulent business system that is basically controlled by 1,500 people, and there's no competition, and they can do whatever they want as sidelines because they're making money in other areas that are guaranteed. So it is important to understand the German business model and its corruption and playing out fraud of how it works around the world. So I'm not. That's really not even in the Copen story, because the bottom line is that was after him, and the machines that they're making, their different units, are all nothing at all like it, and their headquarters, I guess, are in Munich, and they have these particular units that they are manufacturing, a line of Mars 3 units, and what they've done, and if this actual process works the way they're talking about, I'm surprised it's not sweeping the world, but it has been listed. These new products, which is not really produced by him but by the Germans, have been listed as fraudulent products by the FDA because they don't make any sense. Now, the problem is they do that with everything, the FDA, that isn't conventional science. But, we have to get to a point that we have to get evidence from people. They have to produce things. Now, if he's allowed to sell and produce these in the EU, then there are standards, and he should be producing proof of what these things do and verifying it. If hair analysis works, as they say with this automatic electric machine, well, you should be able to verify that by taking the sample and physically testing it, which is an accepted scientific mode of testing. It's not using bioresonance. So how this works by taking hair and putting it in a plastic well, I have no idea. I mean, how are they getting any of these kind of energies into the unit? How is it picking up anything? It's not even set up to properly analyze, which I have a real problem with. I have a real problem with this in general with radionic machines, that you just lay something down on the in-plate, out-plate, as I like to call them. Well, how's the energy getting in there? Especially since some of these are even laid down on actual plastic, which is a non-conductor. And of course, these things aren't pure electrical conductions, but there is something to it. How do you get the energy into the unit, etc.? Nobody seems to even talk about that. And it seems to me a great fallacy with radionic machines in general. Do you have some sort of input into the machine? How is the energy getting? I'm laying it on top. Well, This is a pretty bad way of doing things, and if you're going to be using samples for bioresonance, you'd think you'd have to have a much better system than is shown there. So we don't know about any of this, and as usual, you can't get any kind of decent information out of the manufacturers, which makes you wonder as well, how do they even stay in business? Where do they go to people? Buy this, and these are $5, $6, $7,000 machines, very typical of the high-priced junk that the Germans sell. Everything costs a lot of money, and why? Why are these things so expensive if they're so computerized and easy to use? It's a gouging. And if they work so well, why isn't there more information on it? If you can sell it, why can't you talk about it? So I don't quite understand that, particularly in the corrupt EU and the setup of the corruption of German businesses and how they do what they want. So what is going on there? So I don't give bioresonance much credit whatsoever, but I'll talk about that in another situation because it has nothing to do with Copen, who we're trying to go. So Copen put and he had a machine for everything. He even had a one for gold, finding gold and everything else. And what are these all about? Now, as I've talked about, his machines were pretty well made. The initial ones were a little cruder, but his basic machines, which, as I said, have 20, 35 dials on them, that you can dial in all these things. And of course, I guess you're very dependent on his rate books. He had rate books where you could actually dial in the actual frequencies. I can't believe anybody's trying to tune these things. You can't possibly tune something that has that many dials in it. The minute you get over 12 dials, it's near impossible to dial anything correctly. It's too fatiguing. It takes too much. Basically, even after 3 dials, things start to go wacky, and it's very difficult to dial things. Going through dials, each one of them using a pendulum or a stick plate. Stick plates I'm not a fan of either because you're getting kind of something. It's grabbing, it's not grabbing. You're going through it so quickly because of the problems with the multi-dials that you're not really getting good rates. So it's a real problem. And how many people can do sticking properly? Well, they claim that this is something that can be taught easily to everyone. Well, I don't agree with that. Yeah, you can teach it. How accurate is that teaching? Well, as far as I'm concerned, pathetically poor. If you use a pendulum, which is how Copen started out, yes, pendulums are a little better if you're good at it. And very few people are. Very few people can use pendulums successfully. Most people have a lot of problems with getting pendulums to work. So all of this has to be understood in terms of the process. But let's get into this. He's had a lot of these dial devices, and of course, as I've said, they are beautiful to look at. They're well made in terms of what they look at from the outside. What are they in the inside? Well, let me give you my what happened with me with the use of his particular devices, etc. Now, I have many of them right now, and I haven't used them very often, mostly because they're such a bear to learn, and you have to get the books out and so forth. They're not easy to use, and it's going to take a lot of training, and I think that's bad to begin with. But when he started off and having dials, and the more dials you have, I guess to some people they think that's more credibility. It looks more complicated, it takes more work. And apparently, there's some talk that there may have been as many in the manufacture of these as 70,000 units that have been made over these many, many years. Which I find interesting as well, that he was able to sell that much. And I don't know what the true facts there are and how well he was doing in general. With selling of these and how his company was going. I have no idea. The fact that they're still selling stuff. Of course, the bioresonance people took over. People copied him in Mexico. There seems to be somebody in England still making his what they consider analog units. And of course, all of these things are analog in general because that's the way they work. Transferring everything into this computerized whatever, I'm not sure how you're producing resonance with these machines either. How are they doing that? So the whole idea is that the analog tuning units tend to be better. Now, once you do that, you've gotten into a whole nother aspect. And all of these are a problem, like Malcolm Ray units that use cards, etc. Well, basically, you put a card in one area and you produce then a homeopathic rate in the other. And there's absolutely zero in a Malcolm Ray actual physical machine. There's nothing there that does nothing. There's no electricity going through it, which, again, what does that mean anyway? But there's nothing in these things. So you're strictly using the symbolic energy to transfer to either person or to make a rate. So I tell you, there's zero in there. There's just a wire going from one to the other, if there's even that. And of course, we're going to show these online as well. We're going to make photographs. We're going to open these things up so people can see what's in them. Again, there's a lot of talk, but the reason any of this works seems to be what Dr. William Bankston found, which is the actual psychic transmission of these things. It has nothing to do with the machines or the patterns or anything else. It's strictly that the operator has tuned into somebody and is sending them energy. This is what appears what's going on. So you don't need all these things. If we're down to that, are they producing any particular noted energy through the dials? Now, this seems to be not the case, plain and simple. Well, we're going to pick this up in part 2.